back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And here's Jackson.
It's like the reference to the movie.
I did it. I part of me wanted to tell you before we were recording that I was going to do this, but I thought I would inflict it on you the way that I've just inflicted it on the good people. So suffer. All of you.
In other words, what you're saying is in the most utterly predictable way possible. Like, I was expecting you to subvert expectations a little bit and go with, like, it's me, Tony, I'm a finger thing. But then you did the here's Johnny instead, and I'm like, oh, okay. I can react to this way easier.
It's not suffering unless it's overplayed. That's my defense.
In case you didn't read the title and somehow ended up on here and then could not immediately surmise from Jackson's introduction, we're talking about the classic film The Shining this week.
And a little bit about the original novel that it's based on, because I have read it. I don't think a lot of people have, honestly, but I mean, it's a Stephen King book, so a lot of people have, but compared to the movie, it's not nearly as culturally relevant.
Well, see, this is going to be fascinating then, because you read the book, but this is your first time seeing the movie, whereas
yes,
I have seen the movie before and am watching it for a second time without having seen the book. Seen the book? Read the book. We read books. We don't seen books. I have never looked upon this book with mine eyes once. Never even seen it in stores.
Sean, like, flipping through a book, looking at it like Gaston, like, trying to put it in the VCR. Like, he just can't figure it out.
Honestly, I have a little blinder up, so whenever I walk into bookstores and I see The Shining, like, I just put that over there, so I have never physically seen The Shining.
Damn. Big if true.
I'm banned from several bookstores.
I don't blame them.
Listen, it's a lifestyle, all right? I've accepted that this is who I am, that this is who I choose to be and who I present myself as. I'm known around town as that guy who won't look at The Shining, so...
I mean, chase your bliss or your terror as it is here. But I guess I should reiterate. I have not seen The Shining. In fact, Kubrick, in terms of my film repertoire, was a big blind spot until we started the show. If you recall from way back when we did 2001, that was also my first time seeing that movie. So yeah, I've finally gotten around to watching it, and I can say that whenever you watch one of these big famous movies like this, where like every single scene and line of dialogue is a really famous moment to the point where it's almost more meme than movie, so heavily parodied and all that, I felt kind of this way about Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Like, that's still a really good movie. There's still a lot to appreciate, but the shock and the initial... what made that movie so effective is kind of lost to time precisely because of how famous it and all of its twists and turns are. Whereas I found with The Shining, despite being not only just familiar with the story, like culturally, and having read the book, which is significantly different, so that was kind of an interesting exercise in its own right. But because this movie is so much more about like atmosphere and taking in the performances of the characters, particularly Jack Nicholson, really stand out. I mean, always bet on Jack.
Holy shit. To cut you off, Jack Nicholson's performance, we're gonna talk about.
Yes, it's the good shit. It's the real good content, Jack Nicholson's performance. So yeah, there was just so much to take in, and I felt that there were a lot of rich themes very clearly executed in a way that was different from the novel, that was interesting. And it's been some time since I've read the book. I read it probably back in like 2015. So my memory's a little hazy on a lot of the details, but the broad strokes and sort of the narrative surrounding it was very interesting to compare it to. So yeah, if you are like me and have never seen The Shining and are curious about whether or not you should even bother because it's so famous at this point, it's definitely worth doing so. It's got some nice creepy atmosphere, some nice psychological horror, lots of wonderful visuals, great sets, memorable characters. It's got it all. It's a complete package.
I coming into this the second time, I remember watching it the first time a long time ago, and like it might not have been the ideal situation to watch it at the time for a number of reasons, but I remember not being super impressed with it way back when, but going into it the second time, I'm like, all right, there's no way in hell I'm not gonna like this. Like, now that I'm way more familiar with Kubrick's style, way more familiar with like film and understanding how like to appreciate a long shot and not just be like, they're not punching each other in the face. How am I supposed to relate to this content?
So Sean, what you're saying is, while they were out partying, you studied the blade.
Indeed I did. And by the blade, I mean the really, really long shot blade. Like the one where it's just a really long blade, but a continuous shot over the span of like 5 minutes, slowly zooming in. Yeah, that's what I studied. So, going into a second time, the best way I can describe this movie is that it kind of... I'm hesitant to even really call it a true horror movie, because it, up until the end, which, once again, this is the type of thing where if you know anything about The Shining, you know what the end looks like, and you know what I mean by that, but I'm going to not spoil it anyway for, like, the 2 people in the world who don't know what I'm talking about.
Those 2 people will appreciate it.
They will. But, like, the ending 30 minutes kind of turns more conventional horror, but still not in like modern conventional horror, more in creepy imagery rather than jump scares. The rest of it, I would describe as big mood, honestly, to take the phrase of the internet of like 6 months ago at time of recording. So like if anyone's listening to this like years down the road and hears me says that, I'm sorry. You just cringe through your chair, but you know what? Like, that's how I felt watching it, because this movie feels more like a mood than anything to me. At the time of watching it, it is mid-October. It is, like 60-ish outside. It's not necessarily cold, but fairly quickly as I was watching this, I'm like, half expecting to open the blinds and just see snow blanketing everything.
Oh, God. Honestly, it made me a little nostalgic for Marquette. Is that weird?
Maybe a little bit, but also I kind of get it. Like, big, good snows are always really nice.
Like, and like just the whole feeling, like the whole situation of kind of like going crazy and having a deteriorating mental state while being snowed into this isolated location. I mean, that was, not as extreme, but that was basically my grad school experience. Like, a lot of people compared it to The Shining, as well as The Wall from Game of Thrones.
That part's a little weirder. The nostalgia for mentally deteriorating is a little bit stranger.
Nostalgia might not be the quite the right word. I don't know. What I'm trying to say is this hit me in a very particular way.
But like it's a mood, right? Like the fucking movie is a mood. And like that, there's something really effective about that you don't get from knowing the spoilers and everything else that goes along with it. Like there's so much of little detail put in throughout it that really helps create that feeling that you just don't get from seeing, Red Rum and Here's Johnny and all that stuff. There's just so much more to this movie than the spoilers give you. Which is to say, in case you're not picking it up, I really liked it this time. The ending gets a little weird in some places, but outside of that, it's very worth watching. As a little bit of a warning, I guess, if you somehow haven't seen this movie, if you find yourself kind of creatively minded, especially in the vein of someone who is worried about, like, just snapping at loved ones when they interrupt you while you're in, like, the flow or something like that, this movie's gonna be horrifying for you. It's gonna be way too real, and you're gonna be upset with it. Which is all the more reason to watch it. It's very introspective and makes you look at your own life in a way that you were not prepared to look at.
This is very much a I am a shadow, the true self kind of movie, like where you're really facing down your own demons, which is why I think Stephen King doesn't like it very much. But we'll talk about that.
Before we get into spoilers and stuff like that, I do just kind of want to talk about a little bit more of the creepy imagery. Specifically, about the one thing that I'm realizing more and more freaks me the fuck out. And it's a very weird kind of phobia, one that is clearly prevalent amongst more people than just me, but something that is hard to, like, I don't know if there's a word for it. But long hallways fucking freak me out now. And, like, this movie is clearly reveling in them. Like, the patterns in the carpet are all there to seemingly accentuate the length of the hallways. And, like, every shot almost has, like, a push-pull feel to it, where the hallways kind of extend a little bit further. And it oh my god, it gives me such anxiety. And fun fact, part of that could be that the last job I worked at, there was a hallway that sometimes I would look at and feel like it never ended, and it made me want to run out of the building in sheer terror. It is a mood again. I don't know how else to describe it. It's fucking terrifying, and this movie does a really good job of exemplifying long fucking hallways that make your legs heavy, your mind uncomfortable, and, like, your body just racked with anxiety. I love it.
I got nothing to add. Retweet, brother.
Is there anything else you want to talk about pre-spoiler? Like, we're still a little bit ahead of time to dive really into spoilers.
We are a bit ahead of schedule. It's sort of hard to say, especially at what point what sort of counts as a spoiler and what doesn't. I suppose we can talk about the beginning a little bit, and that it's a little slow, but I think overall I like it. I think that it does a very good job of establishing that build up, particularly by the time that Danny is explaining, like, Tony and talks to the doctor lady. And I think even as they're showing everyone around the Overlook, and you see everyone sort of packing up for the season and getting ready to go, I think that has its own sort of weird intensity to it. And a lot of those shots of, like, those tracking shots where they'll be, like, walking down the hallway and it'll be like a scene change, but only because, like, they literally pass through the room and you'll see the wall with, like, a column with a bunch of pictures, and suddenly there's, like, a dramatic change of scenery. A lot of those shots are really interesting, and did a really good job of making the hotel itself feel kind of like a character. And I think this is maybe kind of what's got me with sort of the weird nostalgia, is that, like, that feeling of this sort of anxiety over things that you know can go very wrong, but at the same time, like, kind of telling yourself that you are going to be in this environment, which by all accounts should be, like, really beautiful and serene and, like, a great opportunity, only to start feeling the madness creep in. Like, it was very, very relatable thing for me.
Fair. I mean, that's a way better way of putting it than nostalgic, honestly.
but it's so weird, because I wouldn't say nostalgic is inaccurate, though.
It's a fucking mood.
It is a mood.
It's hard to describe this movie as anything other than a mood. Like, every element of it compounds into becoming a mood of its own type. Like, the hallways, like, there's definitely a phobia to it, but it's also more of an anxiety. It's a fucking mood of feeling trapped in, like, a never-ending cycle. So before you come at me and be like, hey, that job made you feel anxious and, like, you were trapped there and, like, you could never escape. Yeah, I know. I understand. Don't worry.
Well, because, I mean, it's even the same for me. Like, I remember, like, when I was teaching at my old school, and I would be pulling, like, all-nighters and be the only person in the English building all night, and just sort of, like, walking down the halls and, you know, going to grab a soda from the vending machine or a coffee. Yeah, very, very much that mood, very much that long hallway sort of thing. And I don't think it gives me, like, quite the same sense of anxiety, but it is definitely a big mood.
And that's kind of, I mean, fuck, that's this movie. Like, I said it a lot. That's basically what this pre-discussion boils down to, is that this movie is a fucking mood. I do just want to echo, though, I think that the beginning does kind of start off a little bit slow. I mean, if you're familiar with Kubrick's movies even a little bit, you should be expecting a slow burn. Like, going into this, everything is a very long, deliberate shot. There's very few quick shots between things. Every shot is very much intentional. Like, you can feel the intention behind it. And sometimes that just means that the beginning takes a little bit longer. And you linger on Jack Nicholson making indescribable faces, which we could talk about that in pre-discussion.
Yeah, I think so. I think I actually wanted to talk about the choice of Nicholson in general because I'm a little of his performance is 100% great, but I do wonder about some of the what if scenarios because Stephen King famously did not like the casting of Jack Nicholson as Jack, because Jack Nicholson is very obviously a weirdo. I mean, I just want to admit to the public that I think I had my lowest IQ moment ever while I was watching this movie. And then I sat there during one of the scenes where like Jack Nicholson's going crazy and like looking at his like smile and his face and his Vegeta hair. And I said, "Wow, Jack Nicholson sure would make a great Joker." And I'm like, "Of course he would, because he already has. He was the OG." So that all that's just to say that like Nicholson very much like appears even in the calm scenes kind of scary. And
the best way to describe it, like I was watching this trying to understand it, he's detached. Like he feels very detached from the role, and it gives him just like this vibe of just being there and like unhinged and ready to change at a moment's notice.
He's got the crazy eyes. He's got this warmth, but it's like detached is a good word. It's very like a false sort of like warmth to it, like going through the motions and like making small talk with the like business guys. And I think it's a real interesting choice to make him kind of so obviously unsettled from the start, whereas in the book, of course, that's more of the point, is that the hotel is changing him more than having like just exacerbating what is already clearly a problem in the first place.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. And so I do think I would like to sort of peek through the portal and see the alternate universe where they had gone more mild-mannered sort of descent into madness, like in the book. Not that I don't love Jack Nicholson. His performance is like the best part of the whole movie. But I do think it is an interesting question. Could you have the same effect, or what sort of difference would it make if you did cast? I think one of the names that had got tossed around was like Christopher Reeve. Like a more like sort of genuinely charming kind of guy, like slipping into that madness. So I think, yeah, but obviously Kubrick had a vision. He wanted Jack Nicholson, and Nicholson acted the hell out of this part, and I can't say that I regret that at all.
Well, I mean, like, going back to what I was saying about just, like, long shots, like, there are scenes where in movies nowadays, you'd have, like, shot, counter shot in conversations where, like, sometimes someone would be finishing their sentence and it switches already to the next person to respond, to kind of, like, give an idea of, like, action in conversation. Whereas in this movie, it's basically just, like, say your line, we're centering the camera on you, go. And, like, you just watch Jack Nicholson go through a myriad of, basically, like, going back to detached, fake emotions. Like, you can see it in his eyes that he has, like, a detachment from every emotion he's showing in the rest of his face. And it's so unsettlingly uncomfortable.
And this is where I think we start to maybe brush up on some spoiler talk, because I think that gets into, of course, the inescapable sort of issue of how this movie was made and how Stanley Kubrick himself was like an absolute like sociopath artistic genius, because famously he like psychologically tortured Shelley Duvall to get the performance he wanted out of her, and even Nicholson.
We're not condoning this, as an aside.
No, we're gonna put a pin in that. In fact, we're gonna talk more about it. But even Nicholson, like he didn't go to quite the same extremes, but he would still have Nicholson like do these scenes like some 30 odd times, specifically so he could get the more like frustrated, detached feeling from a lot of these lines, and like get rid of some of the sort of fake emotion, and this that starts to creep into these questions of like are you condoning this sort of method of filmmaking? But that we got to save that for spoiler discussion, I think.
It's brilliant, but also just fucking egregious.
It's brilliant, and also because this movie is so about what happens when you're an asshole artist.
Yeah, it feels very self-reflective in a lot of ways. So let's talk spoilers. But before we do, next week we're gonna be talking about Jojo Rabbit, where Taika Waititi both directs and plays the imaginary friend known as Hitler. Like, yes, that Hitler.
Like, honestly, like, I look at Taika Waititi's Hitler and, like, his sort of shiny eyes, and I legit think about Calvin and Hobbes. I don't think it's an accident.
Oh, I guarantee it's not. Taika Waititi is fucking brilliant. I'm very curious to see how this movie goes.
I'm pretty excited. The trailer looked great, so we'll see if it lands.
So now let's call this firm spoiler territory, and I'm gonna let Jackson kick us off here. Because I think to set up what we're going to talk about, which is something that we see reflected in our own lives in some very dark ways, first needs to be set up by talking about some differences between the movie and the book.
Yes. So mostly I was thinking about these differences because, again, it's been a while since I've read the book, so it's not like it was exactly fresh on my mind. But the major differences, especially the ones that Stephen King, whose career I follow like pretty closely, has been pretty vocal about sharing his distaste for. And I think there's been a lot of bad Stephen King adaptations. So if you don't really look into it, it would seem curious that this is the one he would dislike so much. Like, sure, it's not faithful, but it's such a obviously, like, artfully made movie. Like, how could you compare to this? Like, how could you say that this is a worse adaptation than, like, the Tommyknockers or some fucking, like, schlock, you know? But when you look at the context of when The Shining was written in his career and what it was about, how you have his first two published works, you have Carrie and you have Salem's Lot, and then you have The Shining. And Carrie and Salem's Lot...
Was this still under his pseudonym then?
No. This was this would have been the era where he started using it, but this was published under his name.
Okay.
I think The Shining was like his first kind of like big breakout hit. Like, Carrie and Salem's Lot were popular, but not as like, I think this is the one that made him a household name, or started down that road. So, with those books, Salem's Lot I haven't read, so I can't speak to it as much, but that seems to be much more in the vein. I feel like Stephen King has two types of books. You have his just sort of random, like, crazy monster movie ideas that he just sort of puts out there, like Cujo, or one of his, like, haunted cars come to life, or the Tommyknockers or something.
Isn't the Tommyknockers just, like, fucking space meatballs?
I'm pretty sure. I don't know. It's a silly name. That's all I know about it. But then you have the ones that are so much more clearly personal. Something I would file like It under this category. Misery, certainly. Those kind of books that are clearly more rooted in themes kind of close to home. And I think what separates The Shining from a lot of his early works, like with Carrie, that was inspired by his days as a school teacher and sort of observing how cruel that kids could be to one another. But that wasn't like a personal experience in the way that The Shining was. That The Shining is about this alcoholic writer who kind of puts his family through hell and is like trying to atone for it. Disclaimer, I want to throw up a disclaimer since we might be getting into like libel territory. I cannot say, of course, whether or not like Stephen King's was outright abusive to his family, right?
Yeah,
like, that
that's not what we're saying here.
But certainly his substance abuse habits would have put a strain and had an effect on his wife and children. And
that's common knowledge.
Yes. So naturally, I think it would make sense that we would feel particularly protective of this book, and the fact that Jack Torrance in the novel, sort of the big change that Stephen King always points to and what he sort of criticizes about Kubrick's version is that he feels that it's very cold, and this is emblematic in the endings, where Jack Torrance in the book, like, purposefully kind of, snaps out of the hotel-induced sort of, fervor and sets the boilers to blow it up so he isn't hurting his family anymore and takes himself out along with the hotel. Obviously, the movie Jack Torrance dies getting lost in a hedge maze from exposure, and it has this horrible famous grimace as he's neck deep in snow frozen forever.
Dying from exposure is an interesting sentence. I kind of want to come back to that one. That one kind of sent me down. Had a little bit of a brain blast with that sentence.
All right. We'll put a pin in that one for sure. He's it's there in the endings. The book is very passionate, very hot, full of feeling. The movie is very cold, very detached, and I don't think he's necessarily wrong in that assessment. But where I think that this is a case perhaps of sort of seeing his creation perhaps taken a step further, and that, maybe, again, I'm totally psychoanalyzing the guy here, which is not a fair thing for me to do at all. But speaking as someone who this movie made pretty profoundly uncomfortable, I imagine that taking your kind of flawed hero, Book Jack Torrance, who really, he's got his alcoholism problems, he does end up trying to hurt his family, but there's a lot more sort of emphasis, I think, placed on the hotel and the outside sort of blame influencing his actions, and so that kind of leads to that redemption arc. And so this is all well and good for a personal story about a man kind of struggling with his own demons, but I think that it's also what makes Book Shining a little harder to relate to if you don't have those specific problems with substance abuse and that particular dynamic. Whereas Movie Shining, because it's more obvious that Jack is just kind of abusive from the start, and the hotel isn't so much sending him down the wrong path as amplifying the nasty traits of his that he already has up to 11.
The hotel, just to jump in here, in the movie does not feel so it's definitely a character in its own right, but not in a malicious evil lies inside this hotel way until you get to Wendy's trip through the haunted mansion, which we'll also talk about later. Outside of that, it feels very much just isolation and the terror of being with your own self is what's driving it.
Yes. And so I think ultimately the fact that the movie sort of takes a step back from the influence of substance abuse, and this sort of, obviously the supernatural element is still there, but it's perhaps less emphasized. So I think that's basically how he would be interpreting this, that he takes a character who he poured so much of himself into, and seeing him turn into this complete asshole without any redeeming qualities. I mean, it must have felt like an attack, and I don't blame him for not being fond of that, especially since he did put so much of himself in the book. But I think that as an end result, because the movie's a lot more confrontational, I think it makes those themes of abuse and sort of the isolating role artists have on themselves and their family, I think that makes that stuff a lot more uncomfortable and therefore a lot stronger.
Yeah, it doesn't redeem him in the end. And this is where the movie, this is pretty much all taking place in the second act, really. Because the third act kind of takes on a life of its own, where, as I said, becomes more conventional horror, and it's still largely pretty effective. But the second act, where it's way more of a look at an artist just being a shitheel, an absolute fucking nightmare to live with. It forces people who have acted in this way to look upon themselves not with the eyes of, how Stephen King's story is, which is to say, oh, I'm a good person who just has some negative tendencies, but oh my God, what the fuck is wrong with me? These are actual problems that I need to reflect upon. The big fucking moment where I set up, I'm just oh my God, fuck, this is me. I'm a nightmare. I'm a fucking terrible person, and I need to fix this about myself. Is when his wife walks in and he snaps at her because she's just trying to be helpful. She's just trying to, you know, show support and be loving and caring. And he's like, well, now you fucked up my flow. Get the fuck out. What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, that is such a terrible thing to do, such a terrible thing to say. And like, this movie doesn't reconcile with that, to be like, but he has other good qualities, so it's okay that he did this. It's much more like, no, look at what you have done. Look in the mirror. Look at your face. Do you see what you are? Do you see what you are doing? How you are acting? Reconcile with this and be better about yourself.
What I really like about this element of the movie is that I think that this is a movie that has that I think works that line of like presenting someone's motivations as like understandable and human without condoning like the actual actions. Because like in some of the other speeches where like he's talking about, like, it's very clear that Jack is not at all like a successful writer. Like, you know, he's talking about
see, that's the other part that really fucking hurts too, because I'm like, oh my god, these are signs of like mediocrity. Oh fuck. Oh god, is this me? Oh no.
Exactly. And that's the shit that really hurts. And that's the shit that like you don't ever want to like confront and think about. And I say this as someone who has been trying for a while now to get their own novel published, and it still hasn't stuck.
And try as someone who is writing fairly frequently for 25 years later.
Yeah, so like, we know a thing or two about this, and so like that's what I like so much about the movie and this particular plot line is that like it makes it all the worse that you can identify so strongly with him, because you know that you shouldn't. You know that's not a good thing that you can do that. But at the same time, the motivations of like, you know, fears of worthlessness, or like even when he's gone like full crazy and is saying like, I'm not gonna hurt you, I'm just gonna bash your fucking brains in, like that scene, like even in that he's going on a big long rant about like, you know, you can't take me away from the hotel, like do you know what a fucking fool I'd look like, you know, this is my responsibility. And like you can see even in the throes of this like supernatural madness, like that's a coherent, if shitty, like thought process. And so yeah, that the movie walks that line of humanizing him but not necessarily condoning his actions, I think is what makes the character and the performance from Nicholson really, really strong.
And like why it sticks with me as well, because like that scene is really impactful too, because like it was one of those scenes where I'm like, oh my god, like if this is, you know, like, because I see, like, you're right, you see the logic behind it of like, this is, you know, this is my work, this is what I must do, this is who I am. Like I look at that as like, wait, but why? That, like, because I've had similar thoughts along that. Like, you know, I have to focus on this. This is what I have to do. I'm like, yeah, that's my work. But also, this is not a good attitude, you know? Like, fucking life isn't just about work. Move past it. Who gives a shit?
Especially when you are, like, it's one thing to, like, be a workaholic. But so often that comes at the cost of, like, hurting the people around you. Like, you know, particularly like your loved ones and your children, like the people that you're responsible towards. Like another really chilling scene is just that one where Danny is talking to Jack, and he's like, and Jack's like, I don't feel so good today, like I'm real tired. And is that when Danny asked if he'd ever heard him? And he's like, he just like flips his fucking shit. He's like, you know, your bitch of a mom told me to say that, didn't she? Like that. And so like that's the other element that is, you know, as someone who is like unmarried and doesn't have children, thank God. That's maybe less relatable, but nonetheless, it still contributes to that complete picture of this is a very real human being. Like for all the memes of Jack Nicholson being a crazy person, like this is a very human character being portrayed here, and it's just not a very pleasant one.
And once again, like as Jackson and myself are kind of like bearing our soul and being like, yeah, this is a relatable character, that's not a good thing. We're not saying that this is a good thing that we can relate to. Like, I am actively, the more I'm sitting on this movie, the more I'm like, oh my god, I need to change so much about myself. Like, I need to really rethink about what I am, how I'm treating this as a career and as a path and as an option and whatnot. Because I do genuinely like writing, but also if this is how it relates to my loved ones, that's not a good thing. That's a shitty person to be.
And so there's us sort of like grappling with this, but I also want to, we're gonna yank on that lingering thread now and come back to Stanley Kubrick, because there's of course another layer. You have like Stephen King, who is perhaps none too fond of like having to confront all this shit in a way that he didn't in his own book. And then you have Stanley Kubrick, who in order to make this movie about an asshole artist was like infamously one of the most asshole artists of all time. Like, and so it's almost like when you read about the production of The Shining, and then you see like other elements, like the fact that he was so protective of the kid who played Danny. Like, he didn't want him to know that there was something scary and horrible in this movie. Like, he thought that he was just going to be part of a drama. Like, he was so protective of the boy, and yet like completely shit on all over his other actors, particularly Shelley Duvall. I think that element of cognitive dissonance, while of course like, I'm not going to sit here and say that it was a good thing, but that element of cognitive dissonance almost makes the movie fucking stronger. Like, this is such an omnipresent sort of problem that even the creator of the movie isn't getting fucking past this. And I think that might be the most horrifying thing of all. Like, more effective maybe it isn't even the right word, but since it is like a horror movie, it is like a thriller. Yeah, that is fucking scary. That is a scary thought.
It's, oh god, this movie fucking just eats into you. Oh my god, here's one that just fucking stuck with me, and like I just kind of marinating on. It's a little bit back ways from what we're talking about now, but I need to talk about it a little bit. When he is flipping out, being like, yeah, I'll fucking bash your brains in and shit. Did you notice that he goes, you don't help out at all, you don't do anything? And the one scene that we see of anyone doing around the hotel is of Shelley.
Yes, I did notice that. Yup.
That is fucking powerful cinema right there. That is... God,
it really is.
Fucking shattering. Like, if you... As soon as you put that together, you're like, oh god, no.
And she's the one, like, not just like actually taking care of the hotel boilers, but she's the one like raising their fucking kid. She's the one like getting in contact with the like park service when there's a problem. Like, she's doing all the work.
Listen,
all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Listen, publicly to my loved ones, I'm so sorry. I know I'm laughing while I say this, but genuinely, like, this movie is terrifying as someone who is... Once again, you see yourself in Jack and you realize that you are the monster, and it's fucking mortifying to yourself. It is so terrifying. And, like, you kind of reconcile, like, like, it's one of those things where, like, I freely admit, I have snapped at people that I care about, that people that I love at while I've been writing. But, like, I do go out of my way afterwards to make amends, to be like, listen, I'm sorry, I fucked up there. But, like, also, this movie shows, like, just how shitty of a reaction that is. Like, even now, I'm trying to play the fucking Stephen King card and, like, defend myself within my own narrative. Like, I understand why Stephen King was so upset about this production of the movie, because it forces you to reconcile with these things. And I'm already trying to be like, well, listen, I'm not that bad of a bad guy, I'm not chasing people around with a fucking axe. That's not me. That's not what I do. But also, holy shit, I'm trying to defend myself, and that's playing into exactly what this movie wants me to do. Fuck, this podcast is making me realize things about myself. I've had multiple episodes now. I've had episodes that we haven't aired where I've come off a movie just being like, all right, my life is fucking shaken to its core a little bit now.
I've had a few of those moments myself with some of these recent movies. Perhaps in different ways. Although I do want to step back a little bit, and in fairness to Stephen King, not to us, but to Stephen King in particular. In fairness to Stephen King, I think there is value in like having in sort of trying to sort out some of your shit, like, through your writing and maybe, like, creating this perhaps a little neat and tidy redemption arc. Like, on a personal level, I could see how that would have value at him, which is why it's hard for me to say, like, no, Stephen King, you're wrong. Like, you're just, not able to accept the hard truths that you weren't able to admit in your own book. Because, that just might, like, he was working through his problems in his own way. And it was something that it took him a long time to get over. Like, he's pretty candid about this and on writing. You can read all about that. It's a good book.
It's a very good book. I'm reading it right now.
Yeah. And so, but again, that's for the writer of the book, not for us who are watching this and relating to Jack anyway.
Before we move on to lighter things, I just kind of want to talk a little bit, because I just said, like, Jack dies of exposure, which, like, exposure is a big thing when it comes to artists and creators and whatnot, and, like, it kind of presents a sort of, like, necessity to do better than your previous work. Like, once you start getting exposure, like, you constantly want to improve, you constantly want to be better, you just end up more and more in your work until eventually, like, it can kill you. Like, you get so obsessed with what you're doing that, like, I don't know that this is necessarily what they were going for with Jack dying of the cold, but, like, in modern terms, dying of exposure feels very fucking real.
I would like to insert a related but slightly side anecdote while we're on this topic of exposure, just to illustrate, like, how real of a problem this is for, like, artists and creative people. So, George R. R. Martin, of course, most famous for A Song of Ice and Fire.
No, excuse you. Of course, most famous for not finishing A Song of Ice and Fire.
We'll get into that. But George R. R. Martin, of course, wrote books before any of the A Song of Ice and Fire books. He talked about in interviews how he had some modest successes with his first, like, 4 books, and then he wrote this book called The Armageddon Rag that his agent and his publishers, they were all convinced it was going to be a hit, that it had the right premise, had all the right stuff, and it completely fucking flopped, and it basically ended his career in the literary world so much that nobody wanted to do anything with him until he, like, managed to hook up with a friend in Hollywood and, start writing for TV for a while, until eventually he decided to come back and do Song of Ice and Fire. And so, like, that's one way where, like, things were going well until suddenly they weren't. And now, like, I think with the fact that he hasn't finished A Song of Ice and Fire, I think you can see that, like, maybe some of that fear now that all the eyes in the world are on him thanks to the TV show. And now that the TV show has had, like, such a reviled ending.
Yeah, I was trying to make a joke there, but I kind of gave away your punchline, huh?
Yeah. And so, like, the fact that like, people say that, well, is it better for his legacy, like, if he doesn't end it at all? Like, surely that's something that's on his mind. Like, George R. R. Martin might be getting killed by exposure right now. And you could say, like, oh, who gives a fuck? He's, rich and famous, like, whatever, which, is to an extent true. Like, people don't have healthcare in this country. But at the same time, I got a little sympathy for him. That's not an easy position to be in.
Especially as an artist, because you want to finish things you start. Like, it sucks to just have that looming over you, like, oh my god, there's a story that I really want to tell, but, like, what if it ends up being bad?
Yes. I mean, especially, like, this is just a whole other conversation with the way that story is and how it has arguably, like, gotten completely beyond his control.
Oh my god, it's gone. It's gone.
Yeah. The poor bastard just made too many plot lines. He made his world too realistic.
Oh, it was so good. It's such a good series of books too. Let's make it a little bit lighter and funnier in here now. Because I do want to talk about the ending a little bit, and not in the...
Yeah, that's a good place to go, I think.
Not in the exposure vibe as much as in just, like, how the third act plays out. Because in my humble opinion, the third act, there's 2 sides of it. There is Jack and Danny's chase through the maze, which is very effective, very good. It's tense, it's interesting. It continues, like, the thread of kind of creepiness as you kind of get lost in your own interpretations of the maze and everything. And then there is Wendy's tour of Disney's TM Haunted Mansion TM. which is nowhere near as effective. There's a lot of really kind of clever visual stuff going on, like the dog blowjob, which is super, a famous scene, the man in the dog costume blowing the other guy. It's a really interestingly shot scene, like through the door, and you see like people stand up like that. That's a really good shot. The fucking blood out of the elevator is iconic for a reason. It's very good. You don't see the skeleton scene too much.
Yeah, that was. So I have some problems with this Wendy element, which I do think is this little chase, this spooky haunted funhouse is the weakest part of the film. Not every, like, there are, like Sean said, there were some effective moments within this and some good visuals. The skeletons, I laughed out loud.
Oh my god, I genuinely cackled. If you are unfamiliar, she walks into this room, shrieks because when it looks like there's just a bunch of cobwebs on things all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess it's kind of spooky. Like, it looks like all of a sudden this wing got very old and dirty. And then it pans over and you see like fucking Halloween plastic skeletons wearing human clothes. And it looks like directly out of Disney's TM Haunted Mansion TM. It is very funny.
You expect one of them to turn to you in that very like 80s animatronic way and go, "Dead man, tell no tales." Yeah, no, it's very silly. I think conceptually, one of my problems with this is that I sort of liked how the supernatural elements, like Wendy throughout most of the movie is not as in tune with them. Like, they don't seem to bother her. They don't seem to harass her. Her biggest problem seems to be Jack,
which is a very interesting through line.
Yeah, and so I'm a little disappointed that like I think that there's something to having the supernatural elements like mostly affect Jack and then Danny, because you can sort of read into that as like the kind of the father's craziness and abuses are sort of delivered onto the son,
or just like hereditary mysticism.
Yeah, that's that sort of thing. So I think the fact that she gets a full-blown haunted house tour, again, like, your mileage may vary on the individual visuals, but I think that it goes across the sort of her plot line. It doesn't feel like it really jives, and I feel like a lot of the like some of the horror could still be like effective, like her seeing like Dick Halloran's like body just in the main hall. Some of the other
but then juxtaposed to the fucking skeletons, it loses a lot of impact.
It sure does. Surprise skeleton.
Because you're right, like, Dick Halloran's body is an unsettling scene for her. Like, we know it's there, so I don't think it's as effective for the audience. But, like, when she's going on her whirlwind tour of the Haunted Mansion TM, like, it makes sense. It's like a pop-up of normalcy. Well, I mean, quote-unquote normalcy, but, like, it's still death. In comparison to man getting a blowjob from a dog, mask man thing. Like, it works theoretically, but, like, I don't know whether it's just age has lessened the impact of these things, or you're right, like, I didn't even think about the fact that it's very out of place for her storyline. It doesn't line up with everything else that's been going on in her life.
Yeah, because I was aware of a lot of these visuals, again, just kind of through pop cultural osmosis, but I always thought it was either Jack or Danny who was seeing a lot of these. Like, I thought Jack, like, walked in on the dog man, like, during the party scene. Like, that was just something that I had mistakenly picked up in my head. Like, I had sort of come in thinking that they had most of the to do about like the supernatural elements of the plot, and so the fact that the movie like mostly follows that, like, Wendy can't really explain, and I think this is what makes the scene with the rotting lady in the bathtub work really well. Like, in addition to just being like a real skin crawler of an image, like the fact that it's Danny getting choked, Danny reporting this to Wendy, who's not as in tune with the like supernatural elements of the hotel, sending Jack to check it out, who is, but is an asshole, and so lies about what he saw, partially to cover his own ass for being like a philanderer. So like that's a really interesting dynamic that I think having her just go on the haunted mansion ride TM, you know, pay $15 for an e-ticket.
Now like that's an e-ticket attraction.
I mean, oh no, the whole Wendy's whole last part of the movie is just her going on an e-ticket attraction.
It really is. No, it's bizarre. As I said though, like the Jack and Nanny stuff through the mansion or through the maze, I think works really well. I mean, even the Jack and Nanny stuff through the mansion works really well. Like it continues that effective like terror of it.
I really like how he finds Danny, like when he kills Dick Halloran and Danny screams, and that's what outs him. I really like that little connection they had, because it's like, oh, poor Dick. Also, I really the other thing that made me laugh out loud, that I just wasn't prepared for, not that it was like a wrong choice necessarily, but I didn't see Dick Halloran as the kind of guy to have a bunch of naked ladies on
I
his
fucking
walls.
knew that was coming. As soon as you started talking, like he's gonna talk about the fucking the titty pics on his wall.
Because he's the friendly kind of older cook, like good with children, like mentor figure to Danny, and like I guess yeah, the guy's got to get his rocks off somehow. But yeah, very strange.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's wrap this up with the perfect way to wrap this up: the fucking photo at the end. Because
ooh, yes,
this is something that I've been kind of marinating on for a while. Actually, since I saw this movie the first time, because I remember watching this movie the first time, seeing the photo, then being kind of like, that was strange. I don't really understand what's going on there. Like, is that like a goofy twist? Like, is that like, fucking Saw pops out of the grave at the end of Saw 3? I don't know if that happens, but like that feels like something that would happen. I suppose Michael Myers would probably be a better example for that now, wouldn't they?
I've got the perfect one for you.
All right.
There's at the end of like Friday the 13th, I think it's like part 9 or something. You see Jason is getting dragged down to hell, and amongst the demons that are dragging him to hell, Freddy Krueger's clawed hand pops up and like is the final blow leading into Freddy versus Jason.
Okay, well there you go. Yeah, like that's what I'm thinking. Like it feels like a stinger of some sort.
Yeah.
Like the final twist that makes you marinate on it as you leave the theater. And I've been as I said, I've been kind of marinating on it for a little while now, trying to figure out why exactly like they did this, because like it doesn't exactly work as a twist at the end. And like going through and doing a little bit of reading on it, like watching this second time before I even did reading. I basically watched the entire movie with an eye to try and pick up on why they might have done that. And even at the end, I didn't really get it. Call me a dum-dum if you want. I'm fine with that. But like doing some reading, I understand why I didn't really get it. Because option 1 is that this is indicating that Jack is like a reincarnation and this happens repeatedly, which is stupid. And I don't think that that's the plan of the movie. Like,
well, Jack gets the Triforce of Insanity, Danny gets the Triforce of Shining, and Wendy gets the Triforce of Fear. And this happens throughout history as they choose new bearers each time.
You know what? Fair. That makes a little bit more sense than what the fuck fucking cycles. Fuck you. Like, just knowing what I know about Kubrick, that does not seem like a Kubrick ending, you know? Like, he doesn't seem like a stinger type of guy in that way. And, like, I can back this up because Kubrick's own explanation for it is it's kind of showing that Jack has become a part of the hotel's history. Which I works in theory. Like, in the beginning, they do talk about, like, the hotel's history and whatnot. But this is a 2.5 hour movie, and so, like, an hour and a half goes by minimum where you don't think about the hotel's history. And so for this to show up after the end of like just chaos and craziness for an hour and a half, it's kind of jarring and strange, and it makes you feel more in tune to the supernatural elements of it than like he's a part of the hotel's history.
Yeah, I mean, just because there's like the scene of like him at the party, and like, the first time he's getting a drink, like you could argue that it's kind of all in his head and he's just kind of losing it because it's been so long since he had a drink, in addition to all the other like sort of stresses and a cabin fever and all that good stuff. Obviously it gets more explicitly supernatural as it goes on, and so like with this last photo, like that's sort of how I looked at it. I'm like, okay, so he's like part of the hotel's history. I'm like, okay.
I mean, that's the correct response to that end scene. All right.
like I was kind of ready for like I was honestly kind of ready for like an Alfred Hitchcock ending where like because like I think of like The Birds, how like The Birds just ends with them driving away and a bunch of fucking birds staring at them.
I need to rewatch The Birds. I hated The Birds when I watched it.
The Birds
in high
is
school.
not very good, but it's the one that came to mind. There are better examples.
No,
of
I
this.
know. I just like every time someone brings up The Birds, I feel like I need to rewatch it because like I want to give it a fair shake now that I'm way more interested in giving movies fair shakes.
Actually my proudest moment is that I side detail I took one of the film classes I took when I was in undergrad was a Hitchcock class, and The Birds was not part of our syllabus, but it was kind of the only like canon famous Hitchcock movie that wasn't. So I decided that for my we had to pick a Hitchcock movie on our own and write about it. And I decided I was going to write about The Birds. And I think the highest compliment I ever got in a college class was that the professor had said that he thought The Birds was fucking stupid, and my essay made it seem almost legitimate or something along those lines. He was a great cranky old guy. I love that class. Anyways, but so I was kind of like, I think really like just Jack's angry frozen corpse, like after Wendy and Danny drive away, like they kind of get their escape and we sort of linger on, Jack's frozen corpse, which I almost think like keeps that idea still of like, he is frozen here, he is in the hedge maze, like he is part of the hotel's history now without maybe making it so explicit and goofy. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not the strongest ending in my opinion. I mean, people love this movie. I honestly don't know how people feel about this ending though. Like I would be surprised to find that I'm in the minority on that one, but also I would not be surprised to find I'm in the minority on this.
I'm willing to bet that a lot of people feel similarly, but I think this might be one of those movies, like, because it's Kubrick, that people kind of give it a little bit of leg room, like in terms of interpretation. Now, whether or not that's deserved is perhaps another question, but I'm willing to bet it's not that uncommon if people are willing to admit it to themselves.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't feel particularly strongly about this last shot one way or the other, so I guess take that as you will.
Yeah, no, it's a strange last shot. And speaking of strange last shots, I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/helpusunderscore_Skippy. You can find my writing, as I said, over at 25yearslatersite.com. I write a lot about video games and stuff over there, so go read that stuff.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me at twitch.tv/JacksonJKeller. I play Smash Brothers. Come play with me, please. I need friends.
I'll be there sometimes. It's okay. If you want to follow the podcast, kind of keep up to date with what's going on, all that good stuff, you should follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/BADH_cast. I tweet occasionally from there. I'm trying to do more. It's going okay.
It's all right.
But I am trying to push more tweets from that account, so go follow that. We also have some stuff kind of in the pipeworks that it's going to start showing up on Twitter, so go watch out for that. If you want to get in contact with us more directly, you should go over to patreon.com/BADHcast, where you can give us $1 and join our Discord. You can yell at us, like, you can add us directly and be like, hey, you're fucking stupid. Let's have a discussion, and we'll talk to you on our Discord. Because
it really is the most brilliant move on our part ever, that I deleted my Twitter, and there's no easy way to come yell at me. You have to pay to come yell at me, so come do it.
And there's your opportunity. You got to go on fucking Discord, and the only way to do that is through Patreon. You know what you can also do on Patreon is you can give us $5 a month, and that'll get you access to our bonus episodes. We have a ton of good bonus episode content. Like, our bonus episodes are genuine bangers. Like, I would say every one of our bonus episodes are of equal quality to this episode, which I would describe as very good.
I mean, like, if we're gonna rank the beating a dead horse canon, I mean, I would generally agree.
Yeah, like, our bonus episodes are all real good, and it helps because our bonus episodes are almost all suggested by people like you. So we know what we're getting into, that it's either gonna be a really good movie or a really bad movie, and you can riff and have fun. And how do you suggest that, you might ask? Well, you become a $10 patron over at patreon.com/BADHcast. But you don't just get to suggest things to us.
You get a little special shout out here. Thank you so much, Julia, Travis, Autumn, Summer. Thank you all. Thank you for keeping the lights on. Thank you for suggesting such wild and wacky movies. Real great variety, real great diversity of films in the bonus episodes.
And we actually just released our P3 episode like a day or two ago when this goes live. So we talked about all 4 P3 movies. If you're looking to get your Persona content going, there you go.
We boo trash.
I blame Jackson. Also, we'd like to give a shout out to Lords of the Highway for use of our theme song. It is Suicide alternate take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. They're on Spotify, iTunes, I assume. Most places you can get music. I have to imagine they're there. I don't really know where people get music anymore. I'm old. Sorry. But you should definitely do that. If you can go see them live, please go see them live. They're a very good band. They're a lot of fun. They're really high energy. They're great. We should also give a shout out to 25yearslatersite.com. They keep our link and stuff on their page, which is fucking incredible. There are a bunch of really, really cool people doing a bunch of really cool writing. Way more talented than I am. So you should go click on that shit. They got movies, TV shows. They've got wrestling. They've got video games as well. Now, what the hell? They cover everything, including news, reviews, analyses, interviews. If you fucking name it, they probably got it. So you should go read their stuff. Give them your clicks. It's good content. Next week, as I said, we're going to be talking about Jojo Rabbit. It's going to be a movie that we're going to watch. I'm very excited. I don't know what we're going to talk about yet, though, but it's probably going to involve Hitler.
It's gonna be spicy.
Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go